Running Sentences presents The Madhouse Job, Part 6, Dreams. What dreams? Jasper finds that things can and will get worse in this nightmare of a situation. He wants off this wild ride as soon as possible. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and situations within this story are wholly from the author's imagination. Any resemblance to any real people and or situations or businesses or events is purely coincidental and entirely unintentional. Copyright 2021, Michael Honore. All rights reserved. With a start, Jasper shot up and found himself blinking at the bright sunlight spewing through a window. He blinked again as a cold breeze whipped through the remnant of what had once been window shades. He looked about the place to get his bearings and then pinched himself. Ow! The pinch had hurt as he tried to comprehend the sight of an abandoned surgery room that had a built-in amphitheater above it. He himself soon felt the cold and realized that he was wearing nothing but a surgical gown of the thinnest material. With this coldness settling about the room and his breath coming out in wisps of smoke, he jumped off the metal slab and made for the nearby double doors, his brain trying as fast as possible to remember that there had been a knife or very big dagger or blade or whatever it was flying at his face a few seconds ago. But it had been thrown at him, and now he was here. He absent-mindedly touched his face. There was no scars or anything, and everything was weird. So par for the course. He walked into a hallway that was in a similar state of abandonment, which further helped Jasper justify the thought that this wasn't a dream. Or maybe it was, but he kept believing it was anyway. No sense in getting surprised by anything out of the ordinary at this point. He looked about the space for any signs of clothes, but of course there were none. The only thing that was there that he could see was doors to other rooms, and, of course, the long hallway he found himself in, and which, on one end, ended in a wall, and the other a doorway. Jasper quickly chose to head towards the end with the doorway. The doors flapped open and put him in a nurse's station waiting area. The place had seen better days, with what looked to be former chairs thrown about the intersecting area, with 3 hallways meeting here. And there's a little graffiti on the walls around the area. And for some reason, he kept looking at the walls, expecting there to be an electrical outlet or something. And he couldn't figure out why he was doing so. It just felt like he should be looking. He'd yet to see one, and he found himself looking all over the place, including the nurse's desk, for anything. There was nothing. Is this a dream or not? I don't know. The pinch hurt, but who knows if that wacky machine that I was hooked up to, I think. And dreams can sync up pain. There was a soft outline of a sign nearby that said nurse's office, which drew him towards there as another cold breeze shot through the air, bustled its way into the hallway. And all of that can wait. I need something to cover myself. Jasper walked into what looked to be a locker room, and one that had been ruffled through as all of the lockers were opened. What was hanging in them had mostly consisted of starched white dresses that were now just lying on the dirty ground. Jasper dug through all of this mess, looking for a potential male uniform, but finding none. He grabbed one of the dresses that looked like it would fit and threw it on over his hospital gown. The dress didn't fully fit and felt oddly constricting, but he did provide something against the cold as he headed towards the back of the room where a nurse's desk was to begin searching for some information. The little office in the back of the changing room looked like it had been trifled with as well. It was much like the changing room, in that everything looked like it had been thrown about, but not taken. Jasper sat down on a creaky old roller chair that tilted to the left, and he found himself trying to lean to the right to balance it out. He soon found a stack of papers, all with the year 1958 stamped on them, and were all orders for nurses' uniforms. Many of the other papers and things about the desk were of little value other than to let him know that he was still on this island. With a sigh, he heaved himself up out of the chair and headed back towards the nursing station. When he got back, the sound of crunching footsteps out near the nurse's station brought Jasper down to a hunkered position, and as he began to creep ever so slowly out of the way. He wanted to surprise whoever was out there so that he wouldn't be caught and have to explain the uniform if it was noticed. Or, just explain himself in general. It was all very, very weird. All of this, which he had no doubt, it would be hard to explain away. Once he got out of the nurse's station, he saw a fleeting figure coming down the hallway that he was pretty sure he'd come from. And from what he could tell, it wasn't anyone he knew, and that was enough for him to head in the opposite direction, but slowly, so as to not draw any attention. Having fled this nurse's station and down a hallway, Jasper found himself at the front entrance of a building. To him, and he wasn't entirely sure if it was or wasn't, it looked like one of the medical buildings where they performed surgery, which meant that they were probably close to the dorms where the workers stayed. He wasted no time in dodging his way past some debris that had fallen from the roof and partially clogged the way to the door. Outside, he raced across a grassy area that had overrun what were supposed to be clean-cut walking areas. He made good time to the staffing dorms and bounded up the small staircase to the front door, but found that he could not get in. This was because it had rubble collapsed all around the doorway. The stone and metal rebar sat firmly in place despite his best efforts to push it any way and any direction. After a few seconds, he abandoned this effort and jumped down the stairs to look about for any other way in. He moved his way around towards the back of the building, and he found to his annoyance that this was much like the front side. All of the windows were in place and locked to the ones that he could get close to. The doorway into the back was also filled with rebar and rubble. There was no other way in, and he started to head back the way he came, trying to think, why had he wanted to come here? What propelled him to think of the dorms or staffing house as a place to go? Then looked down at the dress he was wearing, and his mind said, "Hello, that's your answer. Clothes." "There you are, Jasper. I went looking for you and wondered what happened to you. And why are you wearing that?" Jasper, who had been looking down at his dress, pulled his head up to stare at Johanna Luck, who was now right in front of him. "Oh, it's a bit difficult to explain. I woke up wearing only a surgical gown and could only find this dress to cover up. It's why I'm here at the dorms, to try and see if they have any clothes. As for where I went, I don't know that I have a good explanation yet. It's all very foggy, and it has to do with the founder of the island. Maybe, potentially, it may have been a dream within a dream within a dream, or something like that." She looked him over dubiously and shrugged. "Oh well, I guess I was going to say it makes you look very feminine, but never mind that. Let's go look for one of the access grids." The what?" But the woman had floated away, looking at the ground. Jasper followed at a distance, keeping his eye on her and the fact that she seemed to be floating. And then all around him, waiting for something else to pop out and try and take off his head. They traveled away from the staff quarters for a bit, into a field that was just in sight of another facility building. There, right about in the middle of the field, Johanna came to a stop and then leaned down to pick something up with great effort. Whatever it was, though, Jasper, who was a few feet away, couldn't see it amongst the long grass. What's going on?" "I found it." She took a step forward and then disappeared. Jasper stopped breathing for a second, then, in a rush, moved forward and took a breath. It was a mistake, as he soon found his feet were no longer touching the ground. With a thud, he landed on his feet on cement, which promptly made him crumple to the ground. The shock from the hard surface, plus being completely unprepared for it, jammed up his legs, which were now tingling from the vibration of the landing. Johanna was standing near a trolley tracks, looking either way before glancing back at him. "Come on, we don't have time to lie about this place." She hurried over and helped him get to his feet, by offering her hand, which he took, and soon was standing once again, and took to following her, at a distance, as they travelled down the lit tunnel. The only noises coming from a humming overhead was the lights, he believed, and their own footsteps, although she did still seem to be floating, which was unnerving him, because this was supposed to be real life, wasn't it? Well, it didn't seem to take long. Jasper also admitted to himself he hadn't exactly paid much attention to time, so there was a good chance that a whole bunch of it had run off when he wasn't noticing, thus making it later than it was as they came into the basement of the staff housing. His mind was busy trying to put together these thoughts as they went into this basement area of the building. Johanna, who was a few feet ahead of him, had rushed over to a nearby faded sign that had dust and rubble all around it. "I think this one says that this is staff housing. Do you want to go upstairs and search for some clothes, or that's what you wanted, right?" She pointed towards a pair of stairs that looked to be on its last legs of holding up. Yes, if it gets me out of this gown and nursing dress, then yes. Even as he said this, the pit of his stomach and the top of his mind were furiously protesting the idea. He wasn't sure exactly why. It seemed that something was off, but he still stepped forward towards the staircase. The first few steps were fine. Then he carefully stepped around a piece of rebar metal which had poked its way through a fourth or a fifth step. It was stuck into part of the step and blocked the path for half of the stair. Once around that, though, things only got dicier, as the next 3 steps, though all clear of all debris, felt like they wanted to break. The creaking noise that they gave off, and that they had a fair amount of give in them, gave him no confidence that they would hold up at all. Worse, this was only about 7 steps up, with plenty more to go. Giving up on a slow, methodical, and steady process, since at least a few broken steps were in front of him, Jasper found a solid step that didn't have any give to it, and launched himself in a steady rush upwards. He threw himself through an open doorway at the top of the stairs to safety. Happy that he'd survived, he failed to take into account what might be on the other side of the doorway, and thus skittered across a hallway, banging into the opposite wall. He was soon joined by Johanna, who had done much the same thing, only hurtling into him instead of the wall. She knocked the air out of him as she hit him, and though she didn't seem as affected, and was soon standing up, but he was staying down for a few more seconds, gasping for any air he could get. "Would you look at this place?" He finally wrestled himself upward, after catching a few seconds of air, and looked around to see a spotless hallway with a shiny floor. It was well lit and showed signs of being taken care of. Even the signage, directing people where to go, showing which way was which, had a nice shine to it. "Well, where are we headed to in this building, or are we just doing a general rummage?" "3rd floor, room all the way to the right side of the hallway, from the staircase. That was my room." "Your room?" Yes, I think. My world, maybe not a dream world, I think this is, I'm not even sure anymore, but I think this might actually be a dream world again. So, in my world, I worked in this place for various reasons. Now I want to see if my world and this world have any similarities, and there probably clothes are there that should fit me, maybe. She stepped out of the way as he finally got up and began marching to find another staircase going upward. Jasper and Johanna found a stairway and headed up to the 3rd floor. It was as clean as the 1st floor, and they soon found themselves in front of the door that Jasper had claimed to be his bedroom. His hand was on the doorknob, but his head wasn't turning it. He kept asking himself why he was here. It was to get out, but other than clothes, why go all the way here? Was there something here? Maybe this had a mirror that would lead him out. If this was a real world, or if this was a dream world, or if this was... His mind stopped in protest and refused to think anymore. "Are you going to try and open the door or not?" He twisted the knob and pushed his way in. The apartment-like room was much like Jasper remembered it. Boxes and stuff lying about packed up, with little time for him to move in and get his life sorted before he'd thrown his life into his work as a cleaner. This thing, this job, this whatever it was, felt like it had already been years ago already, but he knew better. Johanna had gone over to one of the boxes and pulled out some pieces of rather lacy lingerie. "Now, either you have a very interesting life, Mr. Hughes, or this room may not be yours." He moved over towards the entranceway, which he'd been standing in, taking in the sight of a nearby box. He went over towards it. The flaps of the box were not fastened shut, and he easily pulled it open to reveal more women's clothing. This threw him through a loop, and he opened and closed his mouth a few times, trying to put something out. "Well, there are clothes here, and they might fit you. I don't think they're yours, Mr. Hughes, but what do I know? Now, I do think you should at least put on some pants, judging from how cold your legs look. While you do that, I'll go see if there are any men's clothes in any of the other rooms. Will that sound okay to you?" She grabbed what amounted to a pantsuit and some underwear, and threw them onto a bed, and then proceeded out of the room. He kept looking through this box in front of him, hoping he'd come across something a little less frilly or a little less feminine. But the only thing that came to his hand was a book, which he dutifully pulled out. Diary? And one written in gold embalming on the cover, declaring it a diary. Aren't they supposed to be better hidden, sort of secretive books? He sighed and tossed the book onto the bed next to the clothes that had been thrown there by Johanna. While the room did have some warmth to it, he would like to cover his legs in case he had to go elsewhere. He snatched all of the clothes off of the bed, including the underwear. For some reason, he'd made his way towards the bathroom, and it didn't really make sense to his mind, and his mind wasn't bothering to explain things to him right now. So Jasper found himself getting changed in this bathroom. The nurse's dress was quickly gone, along with medical gown, and he was soon wearing the slightly feminine, but not too feminine, pantsuit, and examining himself in the mirror. It all looked okay, and since, after all, there were just clothes with buttons on some other sides, and maybe some softer fabrics, or not as good pockets, but otherwise it was all just clothes, right? With a shake of his head, he stopped looking. This was getting mad. Was he really looking to see if he looked okay? This place seemed to be designed to drive people to madness, and he was certainly feeling like he was going there. Jasper strolled out of the bathroom and headed over towards the bed as he sat down. He couldn't bring himself to step outside of the room to join in the search for other clothes. It just didn't feel right. Although absent-mindedly he picked up the diary and began to look it over. "My name is Jules Vernon Jasper Hughes, and I have disappeared. If that is the case, I have a story to tell you about Hewitt Tyler and Sebastian Locke. These two men have bought and built this hospital together. They are using it to find a path to immortality or just long life. This is my theory of what goes on in the basement." That was all that was written on the first page, and the rest of the pages were all blank of any content. Jasper jumped up from the bed, clutching the book in his hand as he went to search for Johanna. He rushed into the hallway and came to a stop as quickly as he could, looking about for any open doors. His hope was that any such door would show him where Johanna was. However, there was no signs of any such thing, and he soon found himself hurrying down the hallway looking harder. His search took him to the relaxation room, where the staff could go off when bored and not working. The pool table and bookshelves were filled with books there, as he remembered them being, but it felt off. There should be maybe a layer of dust or something, and then there was a clean section of books. It all just was weird, and he decided he didn't like it here, and since Johanna wasn't here, he moved to head out to search for her. But the sound of a voice stopped him. "It's okay, I know the patient thinks he's a woman. We will take care of it. It's okay, Miss Hughes." Jasper, having heard enough, stepped out into the hallway to find it completely empty, though he swore that he could see faint wisps moving about the place, with the faintest of what could be called a voice slipping past him as well. The whole thing made his head swim as he moved back into the room. He re-entered the relaxation room. Still with the diary in his hands, he saw a soft spot on the sofa that seemed to be calling to him, and so he sat down to think. He was staring at the books on the shelves in front of him and spotted a clean area where the books did not have any dust. There was definitely a spot for a book there. It was then that it dawned on him. All of these books looked like the one that was in his hand. They were very diary-like. Jasper rose from his chair, and the voices rose as he did, but he put those out of his mind as he walked over to this bookshelf and then slid the diary, into an empty slot and stepped back. Then he jumped back further as the wall of books slid to the side, revealing Dr. George, standing in front of a computer machine that also had a security monitor screen to the side. Jasper stared for a second at George, who stared back. "Oh, poop." With that said, the doctor sprinted away, down a hallway that was hidden behind the bookshelf. Jasper stood there for a second, before slowly deciding to follow. The hallway he headed down was an odd one. It seemed to be tilted downwards, but because it was just one long continuous-looking thing, it was hard to tell if it was or wasn't odd or tilting downwards. The shape of the doctor he knew as George was up ahead of him, moving at a bit like a blob. There, but not close. Jasper found himself wondering if the man was the doctor in this world or not, or if it was the man he knew or not. And just when it began to feel like the chase was never gaining or going away on this man and would never end, the man disappeared. He hurried to the end of the hallway where he last saw the man, although this took a few seconds for him to get there. He found a doorway to his right, and so he entered. As things are ever complicated, he found himself in an office with plenty of computers, and it felt and looked very familiar to him. In fact, it looked like the one where he'd met the head of Tyler Hewitt in. And then he saw himself enter the room. A sinking feeling that he was going to watch himself get hit by a blade in the face struck him. But as things played out, as he remembered them, including the knife throw, it didn't wind up that way as he thought it would. No, he watched his figure faint away, and somehow this saved him as he fell down a second before the blade arrived. He watched this scene replay several times over before moving on towards another door, feeling like he was wasting time just standing there watching this. Things took an even weirder turn when he walked into a funhouse mirror room. Each mirror showed off a phase of his life in a flash of a second, and then repeating. He could just catch glimpses of himself as he moved through the maze of mirrors that guided him through the scenes that he'd mostly forgotten from his life. Jasper didn't bother to look at them. He knew them, but he didn't want to know them again. His first crush, and then the crushing rejection, the time he crashed a car, it all flashed by as he went past it, until he finally reached the end with a door, and a sign saying, "Do not enter," stood. Of all the ridiculous things to have to deal with, he went over and opened the door. Not expecting anything, Jasper found himself in another office, only this one was a waiting room of an office space, a clean and nice space, with George sitting behind a desk. The faint hymn of elevator music hung around the area, and to which George was bobbing his head from side to side, as well as kicking his feet to the rhythm. Jasper could tell this because the desk was not an enclosed one, and was more of a table than a desk, but those things can often be interchangeable. Taking a breath and trying to fight back a headache, Jasper found himself marching up to the desk. "George, what's going on?" "Not much. What's going on with you, sir?" "Nothing. Wait, stop this distraction. You're pretending that you weren't just trying to send me away, and now you're here behind this desk?" "Oh, you caught me, eh? It's a little game I like to play. Would you like to play again?" "No, I don't want to play. I want to find a mirror and leave." Fine. Through the door behind me is a room. It holds 3 mirrors and 3 challenges. Guess the right one, this all ends. Guess wrong, and you will wind up going deeper. Though if you stayed and played, I could give you some hints. Would those hints actually help me, George? No, I just wanted someone to play with. I would have strung you along and along until... Having heard enough of this, Jasper marched over to the door, behind George, the maybe doctor. His mind questioned if it was the same man who'd been a doctor in his world, or if he was just familiar, and his mind had pasted George's face to a being in his dreams. Because this was definitely turning into a dream. Once more, Jasper stepped into a room, not knowing what to expect. But he found a mostly empty room that had 3 mirrors, like George had said it would. But also a chair set in front of these 3 mirrors. The mirrors were just that, mirrors reflecting his movement about the room that were lit up by some unseen light source. Jasper walked about, trying to see if there was some sort of trick to them. He walked behind them and saw that they were standing on thin air, with no supports on the backside, or reflective surfaces on the back there either. He made his way fully around, and was by the chair, when the room lights suddenly dimmed, except for on the wooden chair. The room stayed like this until he sat down on it. Then the lights dimmed further. One by one, the mirrors lit up with moments from his life. Some recent, like the moment where he was attacked by his uncle in the study of Hewitt Tyler. The next was an older moment from his childhood, where he was playing with his sister. Then there was the last moment, where he saw himself enter the mirror maze that he'd been in just a few minutes ago. He stared at the 3, and then stood up, choosing the 3rd mirror to walk through. Back in the mirror maze room, Jasper did his best to walk through the funhouse maze that kept flashing odd-shaped mirrors at him. He was distracted this time, though, and, unlike previously, these mirrors weren't showing his life. His mind was on edge, as frazzled by the time he reached the exit, this time to an arrow pointing towards an open doorway that spilled out into some blinding light. His mind reeled when he stepped into another room that made no sense. This time, he found himself in what appeared to be a woman's closet, with plenty of clothes, underwear, and fancier lingerie all hanging up very carefully on hangers. It was a full walk-in closet that seemed to go on and on. At first he stared at this sight, wondering why it had come up. His mind had built it, but why? Was he the one who was going mad? He didn't want to stick around and find out or to hear his thoughts on the matter, and charged down the row of clothes heading towards what he saw, or what he hoped, was a door at the other end. This doorway turned out not to be a door, but a secret passageway of sorts, and when he twisted the handle, he found the floor and door and twisted in a circle. When it came to a stop, he found himself back in Locke's office, with Johanna taking a step back in surprise, and she was right in front of him again. He stepped quickly forward and blinked. Then the sound and rattle of the secret door returning to place behind him drew him to look back at it. There before him stood the fireplace. It had acted a secret passageway before, but it didn't make sense. Had he gone back in time? A quick look downward told him that he was still dressed in a woman's pantsuit, so maybe, but maybe not. Where have you been? Exploring, Miss Johanna. You? Trying to figure out how to make this fireplace move since you made it go. What kind of adventure have you been on? Your clothes are completely different. A terrible one. Do you happen to know of a mirror in this area? There's one in the washroom of the office. Other than that, no. Why? Okay, then we need to go find a way into the sub-basement of this building. There is no such... Yeah, there is. He turned and began marching to the door, and only stopped when he glanced over his shoulder when he realized that she was not following him. You can stay here if you wish, but if you want some sort of truth out of this, come with me. He once again found the door downward the hallway, which he hoped would act in the same way, and head down into a basement. Johanna had become so curious and was right behind him, and was peeking over his shoulder as he got his hand to the door handle. This is going to lead to a sub-basement, is it? Up on the 3rd floor? He could understand her tone and statement. It was ridiculous, but it was also his dream. Just as he hoped, there was plunging stairs that headed steeply downward. he decided to begin the journey down, no longer willing to wait around or listen to questions. There was a mirror to get to, and hopefully some answers, somewhere along the way. Hewitt would be down there, hopefully, and even if he was just a head in a jug, the man had some answers to give. His footsteps echoed their way down as he quickened his pace, with the end of the stairs now in sight. The underground lair of an office that Jasper had stumbled upon before came into sight once again. He entered and found the mad scientist lab that was etched in his mind. Plenty of things going beep, then boop, then beep again, and plus many beakers filled with strange liquids that seemed to be everywhere that he looked. But his attention straightened onto a desk near the corner, where a large glass dome stood. Inside was the floating head of Tyler Hewitt, who snarled at the appearance of Jasper. There was also quite a few bubbles foaming up at the top of this dome of this jar. "Tyler Hewitt, owner of this island and long-dead man, I believe. What are you doing here, and how are you here?" "You will not escape. My trap is complete, and you will wander in your dreams forever and ever." "Then I'll wake up." "Your mind won't let you. It dictates what will happen, and you will soon change and forget who you were. Then your life will wilt away, and all of this keeps me alive." Jasper looked about the place for something that might look like a weapon. The only thing on hand were beakers. So he grabbed one and smashed it against a nearby table. The ooze of liquid poured out and was soon splattering across this area. The bubbles in the glass containing the home of Hewitt's head flashed furiously in whatever the substance he was in. Don't spill that stuff. It's hard to make, and I need it." "You need this to live in your little dome? Interesting. But I don't have time to go around smashing this place up to ruin your day." He held the jagged edge of the broken glass up to his neck and plunged. With a start, Jasper sat up and found himself back in the room that he'd gone to sleep in. There was no butler around, but he could clearly hear the whining beep of a computer device nearby. His mind had settled enough, and the picture of what had been his bedroom faded to an underground cave below the home of Von Baum. The hard rock table he'd been laying on was not comfortable, and so he quickly slid off, blinking and looking about, then down at himself. It was his usual clothes, which didn't reassure himself. The feeling of a headache coming on and made him touch his head and realize he still had the diodes and probes still stuck on top of it. He ripped them off, tossing them aside and any that had been placed on his body. Thankfully, then this stops the beeping noise. "Hello, is anyone there? Butler person, Von Baum?" He wandered towards a pathway that had led them in, as it was the only way in and out of here. His walk took him up the path to the spot where the cave passage split into many different routes, all of them with their labels above. There he found the butler, sitting in the middle of the room, smoking a cigarette in a zen-like state. Butler, guy, man?" The man's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at Jasper quizzically. "You made it out in one day. My. Well, we have much to do, then." The butler, without any help, rose from his cross-legged position to fully standing. Jasper raised an eyebrow at the sight, but then again butlers were supposed to be able to do just about anything, right? He asked himself this as the butler turned and headed down a new pathway, one that Jasper hoped would not lead to more dreams and nightmares. He thought about heading off down another route just to see what would happen. "I've been watching you carefully, Mr. Hughes. Don't disappoint me now by choosing to run away." Jasper jumped and whirled around to see Von Baum standing there, covered in shadows, but just about making him out. Something seemed creepily off about the man who was just standing there, staring at him. His face looked hollow and eyes emptied of any form of life. He couldn't make out if the man had a weapon on him, but chose not to risk it, as he wasn't sure where he was in the world of life of dreams. He turned around to read the sign on the cavern passage. Hospital. In what seemed to be taking forever, Jasper found himself marching down this narrow cavern passage. The dim lights that had been strung above kept bonking him in the head, no matter how many times he ducked out of the way. All he could tell was that the butler was somewhere up ahead of him, heading down this pathway or up the twisted path, and behind him was the ever-creepy gaze of Baum. He trekked onward, ignoring that his body was protesting this workout. "Don't worry, Mr. Hughes, it's only a bit further." The voice of Baum pushed him to go faster and faster. After what seemed to be forever, the cave passageway came to an abrupt and surprising end. The butler stood there calmly waiting for them to arrive, and once they did, looked them over carefully. "Well, what now, Mr. Butler?" "We are below the tunnels that are used for moving workers and sometimes guests about the hospital. I assume you are familiar with that?" Jasper nodded yes, not really seeing the point. He looked up to see that there was a tunnel upwards that led to a drain cover, or what looked to be one, above them, which had some light streaming down from it. "We wish for you to return to your job, and when we need you, we will contact you." He jumped at the sound of Baum's voice, which always was unsettling to hear, especially close by. It carried with it a certain grating feeling that went right up his spine. Jasper turned to see the man fully in the light, since it was the first time he'd seen him since in the bedroom. "I can't." "And why not?" "I, along with others, were fired from our job and sent off to be exile. I don't know what we were sent off to be. There was a big hubbub, a big situation, and I ran away. Then things went even weirder, and it seemed like they just wanted to hunt us. Maybe that was it. I think I remember that." "I see that Mr. Locke is trying to trim the herd of workers again. I believe that would mean that Mr. Hewitt is hungry, and he needs his supply to stay alive. You'll need to work fast, and then not get caught. Either way, up to you. Please go up, though." "Wait, Mr. Hewitt was in my dreams, and would be over 100 years old." "Yes, he would. And he's the only connection we have to why things disappear on this island. If he exists in the first place. I need you to go up and get to him, or to Locke, or just figure out what's going on. Now please, go." Baum had produced a pistol and leveled it at Jasper, who could only raise an eyebrow. How the bloody hell was he going to hide in plain sight? Unless he pretended he was mad, but that wouldn't get him near Locke. But his other option was to be shot, and that didn't sound appealing in the least. He turned and looked at the rock wall, and guessed it looked semi-climbable, as he reached up and began grappling his way upward. Doing his best to climb up, Jasper found himself in a little tunnel that was leading upward to the drain cover. The space was narrow, and he had to use both sides of this rocky tunnel to clamber his way up, and for a place to put his feet. After a few minutes of scrambling, he was at the cover and pushing at it to get it to open, while desperately trying to hold on to the walls with his feet in either hand, so that he didn't fall down. He popped out of the drain once the cover was firmly pushed to the side, and using the last of his strength in his arms, he pushed himself out onto the ground of the tram-line tunnel with its blinking lights. He lay on the floor, collecting himself and listening for the busy buzz to see if any trams were coming by. There was no noise, and thankfully the drain access was away from where the tram actual lines were, so that he wouldn't get run over. Doing his best to keep his wits about him, though, Jasper noted that to his right there were some bright lights off down that way, which likely meant that there was some sort of building nearby. He listened to see if there was any voices coming from this area, as he tried his best to quietly rearrange the drain cover so that it was back in place. With no sound coming from either direction, and the cover back where it belonged, Jasper stole his way down the tunnel towards the lights. He came into the basement stop for the building, and found it to be one of the fancier ones that he'd seen. It was done up to look nice and special with marble columns plus fancy flooring. Jasper could only guess what was up with this place, since it felt off and he was sure he hadn't been here before. There didn't seem to be any signs that would point him towards what the building was or what one might find in there. Fighting back in frustration and knowing that he didn't have time to question what this place was, he bounded up the stairs to find out for himself. The ridiculous and nice-looking building continued with its marble and expensive looks. Everything he found on this first-floor lobby was finely crafted and not to be touched. The stairs which Jasper had come up even had a bit of a coppery inlay on each step. His mind fogged up as he found himself in the lobby and could no longer think straight. It was all so mad and odd that he did wonder if it was once again a dream or just his imagination or something. It didn't fit, it didn't work. What was going on? His steps took him through the lobby space towards a door with a sign for secretary above it. A bustling office greeted him as he entered, with secretaries both male and female moving about a small space. The space was tucked in and packed with boxes and files, and all pretenses of expensiveness and luxury were not here. Once one of the women came to a stop in front of him, carrying a box. She looked him over once and quickly. "You're the new hire." I don't suppose it would matter if you are or aren't. We need help, so if you'd be so kind as to follow me." She strutted off with her swaying walk towards the far side of the room, where another door was. This one did not have a sign above it, and Jasper, who was struggling to concentrate on what was going on, simply followed. He nearly missed getting run over by another secretary, who was also busily moving boxes about. With nothing else to do, his mind was telling him he might be a good way to get a secret cover or something, or get close. And Jasper found himself following this woman. He followed her into a room where she dropped off the box in a space that seemed to stretch for as long as he could see. It was filled with box upon box, on all of them, on shelves, except for the one that she had just put down. "I am Diana, by the way, Diana Cart, secretary in charge of most of the other secretaries. We need someone to sort these out by dates. If you could do that." Jasper opened his mouth to say something, anything, but with a frizzled mind, it made his jaw go up and down. "You aren't a patient, by the way, are you?" "As far as I'm aware, no." "Well, even if you are, you will have to do. We're so short-staffed since the purge that Mr. Locke did. Right, I'll leave you to it." As quickly as she sashayed and sauntered her way in, she was gone, leaving Jasper alone to stare at the rows of boxes. Instead of staying near the front of the storage space, Jasper found himself drawn deep into the interior. He decided that it would be interesting to start near the back, only because it might have old case files, and if he could find them, he could probably start to see what was happening around that time and place it that this hospital had opened, if they kept the files. The problem was the tight aisles had boxes all over the place, and he had to jump over a few to keep going deeper. The back of the room came up suddenly as he found himself staring at the back of a painted wall that made it look like the room kept going. Why? Jasper couldn't be bothered to guess as he looked about the new dimly lit room, where the light bulbs all seemed to have faded into a dreary yellowish light. Still, he grabbed the nearest box off of the dusty shelf from nearest to the wall and pulled it open to see what he was looking at, then pulled a file out of the box and began to look it over. In short order, he found that the box was from the not too distant past of a year ago, which made no sense. He found himself having gone through several boxes in the back, all with recent dates, and then moving forward to find similar results. Jasper moved to the front of the room again and found much the same thing. Boxes all had been dated for the past few years to more recently. He emerged from the storage room to see the secretary's office and looked about for Diana, who he spotted a short distance away, sitting at a desk. In front of her stood the familiar-looking man, who he was sure was George Bunder, the doctor, the thin reed of a man in a white coat, who was unmistakable. And so Jasper froze up. The last time he'd seen him, the man was angry at him for being near Johanna and probably knew that he wasn't supposed to be here. The doctor, whoever he was, began to turn, and Jasper quickly stepped back into the storage room and slammed the door shut. He held on to the door handle and racked his mind for what to do. Could the doctor be headed for here? Did he know this man? Did he not know that man? Was it George Bunder? There was too many variables and not enough time. The knob twisted a bit in his grip, and he realized he wouldn't be able to hold it. But for some reason, he couldn't get himself to let go as it was pulled open. He was pulled back into the secretary's office and found himself flung slightly across the office space. Deciding not to stick around, he dodged a few desks and was rushing towards the door out of the office and to freedom. The freedom that was cut short as one of the secretaries stood in the way, causing him to try and stop short of running into them. He did so, but had to turn away and kept going around until he found himself headed right back into the storage room. Door got stuck and I was trying to open it. Sorry, gotta run back in. He'd come back into the storage room, not sure what he was expecting to happen. The doctor and the secretary would obviously follow him in, and there was no other way out. He'd carefully checked out that before he tried to leave to ask the secretary, Miss Diane, what he was supposed to do. "You're Mr. Jasper Hughes, aren't you?" Jasper turned to face the unfamiliar voice. The sight that greeted him was that of a wiry man in a white coat and spectacles that seemed to wander to the tip of his nose. "Dr. George Bunder told me to look out for crazy people like you. Mr. Locke would try to squish you and you would pop back up unharmed. And somehow this has turned out to be true." "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." "Yes, as if that line ever worked in a movie or in real life. But I thankfully don't care about any of that, Mr. Hughes. What I want is for you to help me." "Well, strange doctor man, sir, thing, whatever you are, I'll consider it if you can tell me something." "A tit-for-tat trade, yes, I like the sound of that. Please ask your question." "Why are all these files new?" The doctor glanced around him at the aisles of files, taking his time to look them over before nodding about something. "They are all of patients that have gone missing during their stay at our little asylum. Some pop back up, most disappear into the mists of the fog. Now, what I want is for you to come see a man with me." "Who?" "Another doctor, one who specializes in otherworldly phenomena. Don't ask why he's on the staff here, but it does help some patients to connect to someone and express themselves, if they believe that they believe in something odd." Jasper looked doubtfully at the man, who smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not bringing you to him, Mr. Locke. I don't want to unleash him on you and dive into your mind and make you even madder. No, I do think you two should meet and have a nice chat." The doctor had finally turned and exited the storage room. Jasper knew he was to follow. Otherwise, well, he'd probably find himself in front of Mr. Locke right away. And he wasn't ready for that kind of thing yet. It'd be nice if the strange doctor had at least been polite to him and offered his name. The glare from the secretary told him he should get a move on and follow, though he questioned himself as to when she had entered the room. He hadn't seen her, but maybe he'd been too concentrated on this strange doctor who refused to give his name. They emerged from the office back into the lobby. The doctor was leading the way, followed by Jasper, and then the secretary, Diana. He wondered why she was coming along, but kept the question to himself as they moved to another door down the hallway, which the doctor opened. This led them to another long hallway, with a similarly marbled floor and ornate look and shine to it. But it also lacked a bit of more of that extra shine, make it less like a place that important visitors. The doctor marched the hallway, passing by several people. Each time they did, Jasper looked at the pairings of them. One person would be a nurse, and the other, likely a patient-like person, or in simple robes. Jasper swore up and down to himself that those in the robes looked like patients who were all people who had been on the bus with him when Locke was trying to get rid of everyone, especially the last one they passed. She looked exactly like the woman on the bus he'd talked to. This was all interrupted by the doctor coming to a stop by a door, which, once they were all gathered at it, he opened it. The office they entered was nice, if simple, and made up of dusty old books, plus a man who was busily reading one of them, and simply didn't bother with anything. Jasper was interrupted in his glances about by the secretary Diana, who breezed past him, and bumped into him as she went around behind the desk. The man and Diana soon kissed rather warmly. Ahem, yes, this is Mr. Worth and Miss Worth. They make up the team that studies weird things, the paranormal, if you will. And why do you want me to meet them, Mr. Oscar Burton? I didn't think anything of it until I asked these two if they knew you. It was by strange luck that we came across you. Okay, and how did you know I was me, and why did you want me, and whatever other questions are about to come up? Ah, sir, we wondered if you would help us kill Mr. Locke. Jasper felt a shudder go through him as he looked between everyone to make sure that they were being serious. He tried in vain to get his thoughts in order, but the word kill, kill, kill kept being the only thing which he could think of. With a desperate hope, Jasper slammed his eyes shut and tried to think. End of part 6. Thank you for listening.